Maroon Spirit 954 back in the building. This is the third fiscal week of the fourth fiscal quarter in the year 2019, the 400th year milestone from 1619 to 2019. As an American descendant of slavery, we're going to finish the 400th year milestone the same way that we're bringing in year one of our new world. Tonight's Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote states the following: if the Negro could abandon the idea of leadership and instead stimulate a larger number of the race to take up definite tasks and sacrifice their time and energy in doing these things efficiently, the race might accomplish something. The race needs workers, not leaders. Such workers will solve the problems which race leaders talk about and raise money to enable them to talk more and more about. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. Tonight's Black Inventor, Mr. Andrew J. Beard, invented the rotary engine, federal patent number 478271, July 5th, 1892. Let's get into the definitions. I added a couple of definitions tonight as we grow and we build on what we're doing. The first definition, American, noun, a native or citizen of the United States. Second definition, descendants, noun, one who follows in the bloodline of an ancestor, either lineally or collaterally. The next definition, slavery, a situation in which one person has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. The next definition, sanctuary, a safe place, especially where legal process cannot be executed. Asylum. The next definition, treaty, an agreement formally signed, ratified, or adhered to between two nations or sovereigns. The next definition, reparations, the act of making amends for a wrong, compensation for an injury or wrong, especially for wartime damages or breach of an international obligation. The 12 steps, practical program of action, 13-week experiment for the American descendants of slavery. Step 1. Learn about the estate or estates your family originated from. Step 2. Who established that state? Step 3. What nation and confederacy had jurisdiction over that area prior to the European? Step 4. Ask all nonprofit organizations you attend, what's your position on reparations? Step 5. They either support it or they don't. No support, no money. However, if they support it, then immediately children and adults need weekly classes free of charge about steps 1, 2, and 3, and field trips to ADOS landmarks in that city, county, and state. Step 6. Don't support European holidays for the remainder of the year. Step 7. Avoid spending money with any small business that doesn't hire your people. Step 8. All businesses need operating cash. Spend money with American black businesses. Step 9. All other groups rely on our energy and operating cash to survive. Set the trends of making other groups follow our lead and support our clubs, services, products, and entertainment. Step 10. The U.S. government is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve prints money, i.e. quantitative easing. It also burns money, i.e. quantitative tightening. The U.S. dollar hasn't been backed by gold since Richard Nixon in 1971. The government operates off the full faith of its citizens to pay debt and taxes. American descendants of slavery no longer have faith in the United States government. This is why financial support will be altered, stopped, and redirected. Step 11. Teach your kids 1 hour a day about their history on this land. Subsection A. Have them learn about a black inventor. Subsection B. Have them know about our heroes. Subsection C. They should know the European that conquered the estate you live in. Subsection D. They should know the nation of people prior to European invasion, militarily and culturally. Step 12. Practicing these steps will educate us on the land we're claiming, America, and attaches us to the U.S. history and laws of the United States government. Every estate American descendants of slavery live in should have steps 1, 2, and 3 advertised via social media, radio, and newspaper. This, in 13 weeks, 1 fiscal quarter, will bring us together for our common cause. So here we are. This is week 3, and today is October 22nd, which is a Tuesday, 2019. So here we are in the 3rd fiscal week of the last fiscal quarter, and we are in the 2nd Seminole War. So we're going to do a quick recap of where we are in the war, and then we're going to get into it and we're going to ride. So the Treaty of Moultrie Creek was violated in 1823. Europeans and Creek natives were capturing men, women, and children of the Seminole Nation and selling them into slavery. King Philip raided plantations to bring back his people. Chief Osceola's maroon wife was seized by a U.S. government agent. Chief Osceola kills a government agent. 1835 war erupts. We going at it. Major Francis Dade's squadron was killed in the Dade massacre by Chief Osceola's warlords. American black Seminole leaders, Abraham, John Horse, Chief Osceola, and Wildcat, are American descendants of slavery heroes. All right, so let's pick up. We're in the 2nd Seminole War, and we're doing part 2. But I got to jump back right quick to that Treaty of Moultrie Creek. And I need to add 2 more treaties in so we can get a full, complete picture of what's taking place in Florida. First, open your mind, and when you think of Florida, don't think of Florida as it is geographically laid out in 2019. Think of Florida and what we now know as Georgia being all one state. Florida was Georgia. So we were escaping the Carolinas and going into Florida. So understand how far Florida extended north. That's number 1. Number 2, understand that there's 2 separate nations within Florida. We have the Seminole Nation, which comprises of Native Americans from different nations that were falling doing battle with the European on this land. You also have those American descendants of slavery that were escaping the legal construct of slavery, which we were taught as being plantation life. Then you have the Maroon Nation. The Maroon Nation is comprised of all American descendants of slavery. Now keep something in mind. Sit back and think about this for a second. A lot of generations of the Maroon Nation never knew slavery. They were born free, but they were educated properly about who their enemy was. So we have to keep that in mind when we're talking about the Maroon Nation. This was hundreds of years of free American blacks. So let's bring that in today's terms. You have a job or you run a business. You also have a group of your people that are locked up. That's a whole separate operation from what's going on in the quote unquote free world. That's the same concept that was going on in the 17 and the 1800s. Maroons didn't know about plantation lifestyle unless you were escaping the plantation. But understand, there were already people within that nation that got married or had an old lady, had kids, their kids had kids, their kids had kids, and they never knew slavery. So understand that when we talk about the Maroon Nation. Now, the Maroon Nation had zero understanding for the European. We gotta remember that. Zero understanding for the European. We knew how medieval he was, and we didn't see him. Bottom line. We'll bust licks with you. We'll do business with you, but signing pieces of paper, nah. And understand that the Seminole Nation was the weak part of our warlords. Because we have a divide at the end of the first Seminole War with the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. And then the Seminole Nation quickly found out we got caught slipping. But I got to add in 2 more treaties and then we'll get straight into the second part of the Seminole War. So we understand that first treaty was the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. Every American descendant of slavery needs to read the Treaty of Moultrie Creek and get an understanding of what happened to your ancestors. So let's follow the timeline. That was 1823, the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. The next treaty, the Treaty of Payne's Landing, 1832. Seminoles signed their rights away to Oklahoma. Here we go again. The Seminoles want to be, no, let me take that back. General Jessup knew that negotiating had to take place with the Seminole Nation and not the Maroon Nation. That was the weak link when it came to any peace negotiations. Put a thumbtack in that and remember that. So here we are, the Treaty of Payne's Landing. This is the second time the Seminoles have signed a treaty with the European, and they done messed around and signed their rights away to go to Oklahoma. Then we have the Treaty of Fort Gibson. 1 year later, in 1833, Seminoles signed their rights away to go to Arkansas. Now keep in mind, while signing their rights away to go to Oklahoma in 1832, that means that leaders and warlords have to go out to Oklahoma. So while you're out in Oklahoma, guess what? You're vulnerable. So you're being attacked back in Florida. And then a year later, you're sending Seminole chiefs and you're sending warlords out to Arkansas territory. And once again, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. All right. So we want to remember those three treaties. The Treaty of Moultrie Creek, 1823. The Treaty of Payne's Landing in 1832. So all three of these treaties, they're being forced to move geographically. The first treaty, Moultrie Creek, now you got to go down to the Everglades area, South Central Florida. The next treaty, 1832. Now you done signed your rights away to go to Oklahoma. And then the Treaty of Fort Gibson in 1833. Now you done signed your rights away to go to Arkansas. Understand this is causing a divide between the Maroons and the Seminoles, because the Maroons have the mindset of, we ain't going nowhere. We set up shop. We've already escaped their legal construct of slavery. We ain't going nowhere. That was our stance. Understand, the Seminoles were willing to negotiate. So this divide is getting deeper. Hold on to that. So we got three treaties that took place: 1823, 1832, 1833. So by 1835, the Seminoles finally realized, all right, I got zero understanding. You done played me three times now. First, you done made me move down to Central Florida. Now you done made me sign my rights away to go to Oklahoma. And now I've signed my rights away again to go to Arkansas. All right. Put your piece of paper down. We going back at it. So it's 1835. We back at it. Now let's set the stage in this second Seminole War, and let's learn the names of the European warlords that we're about to go up against. General Sidney Thomas Jessup, Colonel Zachary Taylor, Major Francis Dade, and General Worth. They all led war campaigns in the Second Seminole War. We already know what happened to Major Francis Dade. He got a massacre named after him and his troops. And understand something else. As I say this in 2019, a lot of my people wonder why the hatred is so deep for the American descendant of slavery. You're not wrapping your mind around the fact that we was in war with these people. So what does war look like? Let's take Major Francis Dade for an example in the Dade Massacre. Those were bloodlines that were cut off. That might have been your only son that joined the military and went down to Florida, thought that him and his group of warlords were going to get straightening, and you never came back. So understand, their hatred is grounded in their American history. But because we're robbed of our history, we a lot of times look at Europeans and say, oh, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? That's why your history is important. You have to understand, we were at war with them. We killed them just like they killed us. The Second Seminole War cost the United States government $40 million, over 1,500 soldiers, and countless European civilians. So understand, they know their history. When they go back to their great-great-great-great-grandfather, they know their story's history. Well, you know, such and such was killed by blacks. So the story go both ways. It was just that our part of history was omitted. So it's almost like we're in an abusive relationship, but we were never told about the part how we got with their program. So understanding our history allows us to no longer play the victim role why things happen to us. We have to remember they took just as much damage as we did, if not more. And I'm going to go on the record and say they took more damage, because if you did not take more damage, why would you intentionally want to misschool us and miseducate us? because your biggest fear is fighting us. General Jessup realized the key to negotiating was the Black Seminole. Understand, this is a war general. He's trying to figure out a way how to win the war for the European. He's got to look at who's the weakest link. Forget about the Maroon Nation. They solid over there. The weak link is we got to negotiate with the Black Seminole. So you got to respect his mind because he was able to identify the weak link. The military always negotiates for the European. As I mentioned earlier in the first video, my bloodline on my mother and my father's side goes back to the Yamacraw Bluff area, what we now know as Savannah, or what we now know as the estate of Georgia. General James Oglethorpe established the colony of Georgia. So let's understand, warlords negotiate on behalf of Europeans. Warlords negotiate on behalf of Europeans. Who negotiates for Native American blacks, i.e., American descendants of slavery in today's time? Preachers and sellout politicians. Do we see where we're backwards and upside down? You have to have somebody with a fighter's mentality that is going to negotiate on behalf of your people. So let's just be real with it for a second. They have people negotiating on their behalf with guns and bullets. We have people negotiating on our half with a Bible. Black Seminoles and Maroons knew the United States government was untrustworthy. Okay. But how many times you got to make the mistake? So understand our relationship with the Black Seminole. The Maroon Nation and the Black Seminole were coming together for the common cause of not losing our land, our culture, our lifestyle, our business, right? Our economies. But the European military warlord continued to target Black Seminole leaders in order to get them to sign treaties, while paper assassinating us within the treaty because our nation was not being recognized. So we were losing twice. We have somebody speaking on our behalf that doesn't have our best interest in mind, and at the same time, we're not being properly included as a nation. Let's get into what is a nation. You got to have a military. I want you to understand the Maroon Nation. In order to have an army, that means that you have an economy that is generating resources where you can have a group of men, maybe even women, fight for you to keep what you have. That means you have to feed them, you have to clothe them, you have to supply them with ammo, you have to supply them with weapons. So when we say Maroon Nation, wrap your mind around what we had. That's the highest level of organization for a group of people. You have your commerce side, which is where the governor would reside and the way that we operated. Then we had our commander, which is going to be our head warlord when it's time to go to war. And we had an economy that could fund that. So you have to clear your mind of what the European has always showed you about Native Americans with little twig leaves around them and running around barefoot. That was not the case. That's one of the reasons why I'm always giving black inventors in the very beginning of a video, because I want you to wrap your mind around how the roles were reversed. We were already utilizing our inventions in our world. They didn't include us into their world into 1865. And then that's when you get a whole host of American descendants of slavery starting to file their inventions within the government, within the European government. But that doesn't mean that we just invented it. No, that's when they allowed us to start adding documents into their government. So you see how they reverse roles? We already had electric lamps. We already had rotary engines. We already had refrigerators, stoves, shoes, ironing boards. We already had all of that. So here's a question. How could we be 3/5 of a human being and we invented most of the significant things that people in America use and benefit from today? How is it possible that we can be 3/5 of a human being, yet our minds invented inventions that we take pride and benefit from today? How is that possible? Because if you're 3/5 of a human being, how you inventing something? If you're 3/5 of a human being, how is it that the Iroquois Confederation met with the Europeans to help them write their own constitution? Ride with me. 1837, General Jessup and Hernandez violated a truce meeting and captured 12 Seminole leaders. King Philip, his son Wildcat, and 10 others were captured. All right, so General Jessup, here we go. He pulled a slick one. He throws in the white towel. I can't beat y'all. Let's have a truce. And at the truce meeting, you capture 12 leaders. Jessup planned to let slaveholders seize them and trade them. So he on some divide and conquer. I'm going to play possum. I'm going to act like, I want to surrender. And then when we meet up to have a truce, I'm going to capture you. And then my plan is, once I capture you, I'm going to give you to the slave traders, and then they're going to disperse you all over America to different plantations. We got to get rid of the brains of this operation. That was his plan for beating us. Wildcat, in his quote, "We resolved to make our escape or die in the attempt." So the 12 leaders already knew what it was. Escaping is not an option. We're going to escape or we're going to die in the attempt. Wildcat and John Horse escaped and rescued the hostages. So your slick little plan didn't work. You thought you were going to call a fake truce meeting. You roped off 12 of the leaders. The 12 leaders, their spirits were too free. You can't lock me up. Not only did they escape, but they got their hostages as well. Wildcat was locked up for weeks before 20 Seminoles led by Wildcat escaped. All right, so it took them some time to figure out how to get from up out of that temporary slavery condition. Colonel Zachary Taylor hunted them down with 70 Native Americans from the Delaware Nation, 180 Tennessee volunteers, and 800 United States soldiers. So it was over 1,000 men hunting down those 12 leaders. Let me repeat that so we'll know who our enemies are. The Delaware Nation. 70 of them showed up. Those Tennessee Volunteers, you know, a lot of y'all like Saturday football and some of y'all love Tennessee Volunteers. Did you know that those are your enemies? Because 180 of those showed up to catch those leaders. And 800 U.S. soldiers, so they over 1,000 deep to come see about the escaped leaders. The Delaware natives fled after the first shot. So the first shot went off. Where you Delaware at? The Tennessee Volunteers fled after the commissioned officers and the non-commissioner officers fell. It's getting ugly for them. Only 4 were left untouched. So out of over 1,000 men, after the first shot, 70 of them hit it. They gone. Then 180 Tennessee Volunteers, they gone. Only 4 out of over 1,000 were untouched. This battle went down in Okeechobee, Florida, and became the most decisive victory within a 40-year period. Now, I had to think about that for a minute because that Dade massacre is special in my heart, right? Because everybody got slaughtered. But I had to marinate on this Okeechobee battle. And everybody who grew up in Florida, Okeechobee, we know the name, but we didn't know the history behind the name. So let's get this straight. Over 1,000 men went to Okeechobee. And out of 1,000 men, where y'all at? Y'all running away just because shots fired. This goes back to the First Seminole War. Europeans rarely relish going into the swamp dense areas coming to see about us. Colonel Taylor had 28 U.S. soldiers die, 112 wounded, and only 10 Maroon and Seminole Americans died. So we're not even including everybody that ran away. Those that actually tried to stay and wallow with us, 112 of them got wounded, 28 of them, they never went back home to mama. Out of over 1,000 men that came to see about us in Okeechobee, 10 of us died. Colonel Taylor still claimed it a victory only after we left. So after all his warlords left or died or became wounded, once we realized when the smoke cleared, y'all don't want to wallow no more, we ain't going at it no more. When we dip, when we leave, now you slick want to write in your second, now you want to make notes. It was a win. I can't tell, not when you got to do that body count. General Jessup decided to negotiate peace and permit the Seminole Nation to migrate to Arkansas and Oklahoma. So understand, the Second Seminole War popped off because of those 3 treaties. The Treaty of Moultrie Creek, the Treaty of Payne's Landing, and the Treaty of Fort Gibson. So we going at it. After that battle in Okeechobee, General Jessup said, you know what? I done sent my colonel down there with over 1,000 men. And them boys came back empty-handed. You know what? Let's work something out and get them people from off this land. We can't do nothing with them. 1838, General Jessup was recalled to Washington, D.C. His peace and military campaigns were failures. Colonel Taylor becomes a brigadier general and assumed command in Florida. So the same colonel that sent over 1,000 men down there and then lied on paper about his little victory only after we left. General Jessup was overseeing the whole operation. So basically the politicians sent him notice. You need to come on back up here to D.C., man. What you got going on in Florida. So Colonel Taylor gets elevated to general. Less than 3 years later, 1841, General Worth enters the war and peace came. So even when they elevated Colonel Taylor, after they made General Jessup step down, come on back to D.C., Colonel Taylor gets upgraded to Brigadier General. We go at it with him for a couple of years, and then they say, yeah, you can't do nothing either. Who next? 1841, General Worth enters the war and peace came. Once peace came in 1841 under General Worth, this is where that Indian Removal Act kicks in full swing. Understand, the Indian Removal Act was established May 28th, 1830. All right. So that's your boy Andrew Jackson. Look at a $20 bill and look at the face on that $20 bill and understand that man set in place the Indian Removal Act in 1830. So Native Americans and American descendants of slavery, we were heading west as early as 1830. It didn't really pop off full swing until 1841. Because remember, the Seminole and the Maroon Nation, we weren't going anywhere. All right. But under General Worth, we came to a peace agreement. Meanwhile, General Jessup, who got called back to Washington, D.C., he had pressure from slaveholders and political figures, but felt he had no choice. So the slaveholders and the politicians, they're mad at General Jessup. Why are you trying to negotiate peace treaties? General Jessup, I set them up. I captured 12 Seminole leaders. They escaped. I sent 1,000 warlords at them in Okeechobee. I got 112. I got 28 dead, 112 wounded, and I got the rest of them missing in action. So then they elevate Colonel Taylor to a brigadier general. He can't get any straightening. And then finally they elevate General Worth to go ahead and finally make it happen. 1843, most of the Seminole Nation, including 500 Maroons, had reached Arkansas and Oklahoma. So from 1841 to 1843, now most of the Seminole Nation is heading west. Understand what west means. West means west of the Mississippi. See, on this land, the Mississippi River is what the Nile River is in Africa. Okay? The European didn't know what was west of the Mississippi River. They thought they were sending all the Native American nations and confederations that were east of the Mississippi River. They thought they were sending them into the wilderness, which was on the west side of the Mississippi River. That just shows how ignorant they were, because once the Maroon Spirited and that Seminole Nation starts going west of the Mississippi River, that's a whole nother story. Now we're going into the Wild Wild West. And as we head into the Wild Wild West, I have to emphasize, after doing this research and doing it for the kids, and for those middle-aged American descendants of slavery, and for those early 20s and 30s American descendants of slavery. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. It can work. But some of our older generation, they're gone. And they're gone because they've sit in front of the TV for too long, and they've sat in these nonprofit organizations that haven't been advocating for our people for too long. They've been compromised mentally and spiritually. They're broken. But after doing this research, I'm going to go on the record and say our biggest problem is Hollywood, movies, and television. Because as we go west of the Mississippi River, everything you think you know about how the West was won was a lie. When you think cowboys, you think Europeans with cowboy hats. Wrong. Understand, when you think Texas Rangers and you think Texas, you think Europeans. Wrong. When you think Buffalo Soldiers, you think Daniel Boone and Paul Bunyan and Jesse James and all these Hollywood characters they gave you. Truth of the matter is, as we head out west, we're going to get into who are the real cowboys. Who were the real Buffalo Soldiers? Who was the real Texas Rangers? It was us. Once again, they couldn't beat us, so they had to lie to us. General Worth wanted all Seminoles removed from Florida to avoid resorts for Maroons. So the whole idea of General Worth making the peace treaty, he didn't want a place for American descendants of slavery to be able to go to. We had Florida on lock. We gotta get the Seminole Nation. We have to split them. We have to divide them. We need to get one of them to compromise. The only one that we can negotiate with and do business with is the Seminole Nation. We cannot do business with the Maroon Nation because they're going to kill us on sight. So you notice all these treaties were with the Seminole Nation, and they neatly evaded, with the power of the pen, ever giving us our proper due respect within the Maroon Nation. There's a reason for that, and we're going to understand that as we move forward, and we're going to understand why in the 1960s we got civil rights and not human rights. See, we've been at war the whole time. The only reason that you have to be civil, for the federal government to say y'all have to be civil with this group of people, you got to think about that. That means that there was a war. But because our ancestors were never properly recognized in writing as a nation, they were able to play this word game with us. Stay with me. Those Maroons and Seminoles that stayed kept fighting as though the war never ended. So even though the Seminole Nation signed the Treaty of Fort Gibson, signed the Treaty of Payne's Landing, so now a bulk of that Seminole Nation is headed to Arkansas and Oklahoma Territory, respectively. A lot of the Seminole Nation didn't leave. And the majority of the Maroon Nation didn't leave. So as the military starts escorting the Seminole Nation and other Native American nations, as they started escorting them west of the Mississippi River, down in Florida, in the meantime, in between time, we were still going at it like the war never stopped. Because at that point, we got zero understanding for the Seminole Nation as well. Y'all go wherever y'all want to go. This our land. We're not moving. So understand that was a huge divide within that Florida area. So when you look at the American descendants of slavery that when you go back in your bloodline and you find your people in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and they were in rural parts of Georgia, rural parts of Florida, understand those were your ancestors that didn't compromise. 1844, Wildcat John Horse and other chiefs traveled to the White House to meet the European president, Polk. Tell me that's not a warrior spirit. We signed 3 treaties. Y'all making us go west. A lot of our people didn't leave Florida, and our brothers and sisters from the Maroon Nation didn't leave Florida. A lot of them didn't leave Florida. They still going at it. It's still on and popping at first sight. So we got to go talk to your president in D.C. Over 200 years, Maroons and Seminoles died trying to live free. They are the greatest American heroes. Let's deal with facts and deal with the record. The Maroon Nation and the Seminole Nation are the greatest American heroes. Why? Because we were fighting for over 200 years for freedom. Not liberty, not justice, freedom. Over 200 years, the Underground Railroad was popping. And I think it's very interesting that Harriet Tubman, most American descendants of slavery know about Harriet Tubman, but we never knew about the Seminole Wars. So where was she leading people to the Underground Railroad? See, they send you all north. Oh, she was running them up to Canada. She was running them up to the Midwest. And you just neatly evaded the greatest American story on this land. There's no greater warrior than the Maroon Nation, the American descendant of slavery. For over 200 years, we operated, went to war, and did business outside of the Europeans' legal construct of slavery. But it gets better. No treaty ended the Third Seminole War. Those descendants are unconquered. Meet the Maroons, the American descendants of slavery. That's why we're the ones they love to hate. That's why all the Native American nations cannot look us in our eyes and be men in front of us. Why? Because all of y'all sold out. All of y'all signed treaties with the European, and you ended up on reservations. Yeah, you might not pay federal tax to the United States government, but you sold out. When you see an American descendant of slavery, you're looking at the real. We're the only ones that didn't sign a treaty with the United States government, and we're still here 400 years later. Your Choctaw, your Chickasaw, your Cherokee, your Seminole, all of y'all switched up and sold out at some point. Now, I got much respect for the Seminole Nation, but you did switch up on us, and we still got to get into that story. We got to move out west with this story and debunk a whole lot of other lies. But at the end of the day, the Third Seminole War never ended. No peace treaty was signed. Why was no peace treaty signed? Because all the Seminole leaders went west to Arkansas and Oklahoma. It wasn't nothing but us left. And we wasn't doing business with you. But my, 400 years later, here we are. And the sheets is getting snatched off of all the lies. It's strictly business at this point. I'm going to say it again. How can we be 3/5 of a man and we invented and built everything? How can my group of people be 3/5 of a human being when we built and invented everything? We designed Washington, D.C. We designed all your major cities. We laid your railroad. We invented the locomotive. We invented everything. When you iron your clothes, we invented that ironing board. When you put shoes on your feet, we invented the shoes. How are we 3/5 of a man? The only person that's 3/5 of a human being, it might be that person that came from the debtor prison from Europe. So this is going to end week 3 of the last fiscal quarter of 2019 as we close out this 400th year milestone. And we can clearly see, and when you do your research, I want you to look for the third Seminole War Peace Treaty. Try to find it. So the next time you see an American descendant of slavery, know you're looking at the realest people on this land. Now, we paid an ultimate price. We've been paying an ultimate price. But we're the only group of people that's been unconquered on this land. There is no treaty where we surrender, but you have on record where the Seminole surrender. You have on record where the Cherokee surrender. You have on record where the Iroquois surrender. You have on record where the Choctaw and the Chickasaw surrendered. The only group of people that did not surrender through a treaty is us. You love our music. You love the way we excel in sports. You love our minds and the way that we come up with inventions. This debt can't be amended with fiat currency. We got to go back to that Constitution. Congress got to give us gold and silver and land. And we need a lot of psychological treatment for all the lies that Hollywood and media has told. The lies are over. All your TV shows about cowboys and it was all a lie. It was all a lie. All of it. Your founding fathers, all of it. It was all a lie. All of it is a lie. And what happens when we realize that it was a lie? Game over. Stay tuned for next week as we get into week 4. I want to leave you with one last thing. I want to go back to one of the steps. Step 4 to be exact. Ask all nonprofit organizations you attend, what's your position on reparations? See, that's a hard pill to swallow. Because a lot of us are unconstitutionally incapable of being honest with ourselves. But the reason why that step is so powerful, I got to go back to the legal definition of sanctuary. A safe place, especially where legal process cannot be executed. I believe illegal immigrants, if they're on if they reside within a sanctuary, they're protected. Illegal immigrants are protected if they reside within a sanctuary. Where's our sanctuary? As American descendants of slavery, who has our back? Where is our sanctuary? I'm going to say it again, people. Show up to the business meeting of your nonprofit organization that you attend. Ask the treasurer, ask the secretary, ask the leader of that organization, what's your stance on reparations? If you don't support it, I'm not putting any more money in your collection plate. I'm not donating to anything else you got going on. God doesn't need fiat currency. Man does. If you want my fiat currency in your collection plate, you're going to work for me. We're not doing what you want to be done. You're going to do what the people people want to be done. Understand, God doesn't need money. Man does. You already have learned in step 1 that you live in the estate. There's a tithing trust. That should say it all right there. So if I'm going to spend my money with you, you working for me. I said working, not entertaining me. See, the illegal immigrant has its nonprofit organizations working for them. The European has his nonprofit organizations working for him. The Native American nations that are recognized on this land have their nonprofit organizations working for them. The only group of people that don't have their organizations working for them happen to be us. But it all comes to an end on the 400th year. 2019, man, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. It's going to be a lot of people selling boiled peanuts next year. We are the gods.